Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're starting off with a visceral test of your own psychology. We are going to look at exactly how our brains process good and bad, and how that deep biological wiring scales all the way up to shape our modern society, our laws, and even our daily economic choices.
Chances are your heartbeat just accelerated a tiny bit seeing those eerie, terrified eyes. And you know what? It probably happened before you could even consciously figure out what was so unsettling about them. Why is that? Well, it's because your brain's amygdala, that's your primary threat center, processes bad news fractions of a second faster than it processes happy, relaxed expressions. In fact, in brain scans, researchers found that subjects registered terrifying eyes even when they were flashed for less than 0.02 of a second. That literally bypasses the visual cortex entirely. It's a completely automatic, unconscious priority system.
So that brings us to our core concept for today. This rapid threat detection mechanism is an evolutionary trait designed to keep us alive, which means that we are biologically hardwired with what psychologists call negativity dominance. Quite literally, negativity, threats, and the urge to escape completely dominate positivity and the drive to approach. By shaving just a few hundredths of a second off the time needed to detect a predator, this brain circuit massively improved our ancestors' odds of living long enough to reproduce. Interestingly enough, researchers haven't found any comparably rapid mechanism for recognizing good news. Threats are simply privileged way above opportunities. To see how this works in everyday life, think about a brilliant analogy from psychologist Paul Rosen, who studies disgust. It shows perfectly how bad simply trumps good. Think about it. A single cockroach in a beautiful bowl of cherries is going to completely wreck your appetite, right? The appeal is instantly gone. But what if you place a single delicious cherry into a bowl of cockroaches? Yeah, it gains absolutely no appeal. The negative carries an infinitely heavier weight in our minds.
And the really crucial point here is that this biological asymmetry doesn't just stop at physical threats, it totally dictates our social lives too. We react intensely even to symbolic threats. Emotionally loaded bad words like war or crime grab our attention so much faster than good words like peace or love. In our personal lives, psychologist John Gottman actually estimated that a stable relationship requires 5 good interactions for every single bad interaction just to survive. 5 to 1. And of course, we all know the ultimate social asymmetry. A deep friendship built over years and years can be completely ruined by just one single bad action. Negativity absolutely dominates.
Section 1. Goals as reference points. Loss aversion in the real world.
To see this in action, economists Devin Pope and Maurice Schweitzer looked at professional golf. In golf, every hole has a par score, and that acts as a very specific psychological reference point. Because of this, putting to avoid a bogey means you're putting to prevent a loss. But conversely, putting to achieve a birdie means you're putting to secure a gain. According to standard logic, a stroke is just a stroke. But because of loss aversion, a bogey feels like a really painful loss, while a birdie just feels like a nice gain. The psychological stakes are completely different.
So, does this actually change behavior on the green? Absolutely. After analyzing more than 2.5 million putts in exquisite detail, they found that professional golfers were 3.6% more successful when putting for par, so avoiding that bogey, than when putting for a birdie. And this held true no matter the distance to the hole or the difficulty of the putt. It's not that these fierce competitors are consciously deciding to slack off on birdie putts, but their intense aversion to failing and taking a loss literally makes them concentrate that much harder.
Now, 3.6% might not sound like a huge deal, right? But to put that into perspective, let's look at the financial impact. The researchers calculated that if, during his absolute best years, Tiger Woods had managed to putt as well for birdies as he naturally did just to save par, his average tournament score would have improved by 1 stroke. And because of that, his earnings would have gone up by almost $1 million per season. That is the massive hidden cost of loss aversion.
And this intense aversion to losing goes way, way beyond sports. It's a fundamental rule that humans, and animals for that matter, fight much harder to prevent losses than to achieve gains. Out in the wild, this perfectly explains why territorial animals almost always defeat challengers, usually in a matter of seconds. In human affairs, it explains why institutional reforms or major corporate restructurings constantly fail. The potential losers of any reform are always going to fight significantly harder and be way more determined than the potential winners. It acts as this powerful conservative force keeping us tied to the status quo.
Section 2. The rules of fairness. How loss aversion shapes society.
Let's look at a really fascinating survey scenario from 1984.
Imagine a hardware store has been selling snow shovels for 15 bucks. The morning after a massive snowstorm hits, the store raises the price to $20. Now, standard economic models say the hardware store is behaving totally appropriately, just responding to increased demand. But think about your own gut reaction for a second. How would you rate this action?
If you just felt a little flash of anger at that store owner, well, you're definitely not alone. An overwhelming 82% of respondents rated this action as unfair or very unfair. People evidently view that pre-blizzard price of $15 as a fixed reference point, basically an entitlement. So the sudden price hike wasn't seen as dynamic pricing, it was viewed as a totally unacceptable loss imposed on them simply because the store had the market power to get away with it.
Let's try another one, just to see exactly how personal these rules really are. Imagine a profitable photocopy shop, where the owner decides to cut a current employee's wage from $9 an hour down to $7. The only reason? Nearby factories closed down, unemployment went up, and cheaper labor is now easily available. Is that fair?
Unsurprisingly, 83% of people found cutting that current worker's pay to be highly unfair. But look what happens when the survey asked about a new replacement worker. When the current worker leaves completely on their own, and the owner decides to pay a new replacement worker $7 an hour, suddenly 73% of people found that completely acceptable. This absolutely proves that the entitlement to a reference point, that $9 wage, is highly personal to the existing worker. A new replacement worker doesn't have a reference point, so that lower wage isn't perceived as an imposed loss.
So what this tells us is that the public essentially recognizes a system of dual entitlement. The unwritten rule goes like this. Businesses can protect themselves if they're threatened. If a firm faces higher costs, it's generally acceptable to pass those losses on just to survive. But it is considered deeply unfair for an employer or a merchant to exploit their power to break informal contracts just to pad their own profits. And society will punish those who do. Employers who violate fairness see reduced worker productivity, and merchants who use unfair pricing lose major sales. In fact, one study showed that customers who realize they've been unfairly charged a higher price reduced their future purchases by 15%. That ended up costing the business an average of $90 per customer.
This whole dynamic is so recognizable and so hardwired into our society that we frequently summarize the asymmetry of losses in our everyday conversations without even realizing the deep biology behind it. We constantly hear phrases like, "This reform will not pass. Those who stand to lose will fight harder than those who stand to gain." Or, we see negotiations totally stall out because both sides feel their own painful concessions way more intensely than the concessions offered by the other side.
So, from a rapidly beating heart in a brain scanner to a $1 million putt on the green, all the way to our basic ideas of economic fairness and justice, understanding loss aversion leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about in our daily lives. Where else is your brain's ancient threat center secretly dictating your modern decisions? Are you holding on to a bad investment, staying in a stagnant situation, or fighting a positive change just because your amygdala is screaming at you to avoid a loss? Keep an eye out for it. It's happening a lot faster than you can blink. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.